So welcome to the session. My name's Karen Walsh. I'm your MC and moderator for the session today. I'm YACVIC's Regional Development Coordinator for the Great South Coast. That's down in the southwest of Victoria. And I use she, her pronouns. I'm zooming in today from beautiful Gunditj Mara country, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners and acknowledge the elders past and present. So, guaranteeing decent work for young people. Decent work. What's that? And can we really guarantee it for young people? Can we guarantee that opportunity for all young people? Our session descriptor says, guarantee young people have access to suitable, safe and meaningful work, which are all super important criteria, but I think personally meaningful is the most misunderstood and also the most important one in that idea of decent. Meaning can be found in having a purpose for our work, meaning and identity. Despite the rubbish pay packets of many in the youth and community sector, we ascribe meaning to the work that we do, with good reason. And it continues to draw so many of the passionate and principled people to work in the sector. And at the same time, some people are making an obscene amount of money out of this COVID-19 recession. And so many young people have found their livelihoods and lives completely disrupted, and their opportunities for suitable, safe and meaningful work are just like fallen away. Their educations and careers may take many years to get back on track, if ever. Recessions impact young people disproportionately, both at the time and throughout the recovery. The unemployment rate of young people 15 to 24 in June last year was 16%, an increase from 12% the previous year and the highest rate since that last big recession in 97. And the underemployment rate increased from 18 to 20%. But more telling for many of us in the sector is that the figure that governments are very concerned about, the not engaged in education or employment, that figure's gone nuts. So in May 2019, there were 8% of people aged 15 to 24 not engaged at some level in education or employment, not on the books. In May 2020, that figure jumped to 12%. And in May this year, it's leveled out a tiny bit, but is still at 11%. Now, the longer that goes on, that people aren't engaged at any level in education or employment, the harder it is to re-engage and the greater impact on long-term social and economic disadvantage, including areas like housing options and mental health. So big issues, and these and other thorny questions will be tackled today in our session by 4 amazing speakers, then a short Q&A session, then 10 to 12 minutes in breakout discussion. You'll be able to pose questions to the panel via the Q&A bit. Oh, somebody will tell you how to do that. Our panel members today are Emma Cull from the Brotherhood of St Laurence, Mairead Lesman from the Young Workers Centre, Emma Linton from Loddon Campaspe Region LLEN, and Kate Roach from Beyond the Bell on the Great South Coast. But first, I'd like to thank McArthur for supporting this session and introduce Sean Callanan. Sean's pronouns are he, him, and he's the Manager of Engagement and Strategy, Human Services McArthur. So over to you, Sean.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the discussion. I'm really looking forward to what everyone talks about today. I think it's a really key topic. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the land that I live on and work on, and acknowledge the elders past and present engaging an ongoing connection to land and waters and culture, and sovereignty has not been sovereignty has not been ceded. I use the pronouns he, him, as Karen introduced me with, and can talk to you today a little bit about recruitment and how that sort of works in this space of youth employment and directions and support. So McArthur's got about 17 years implementing child, youth and family sector recruitment. It's been really significant with a player in this space. We do a lot of international recruitment. We also act as a conduit for new graduates and young people moving through into their professional pathways, which is a key aspect for their professional engagement in work and employment in their future. A question that we often, hang on, sorry, I just lost my place there. My apologies. I suppose if we look at growing, we have a growing capability of workforce in complex sectors in how we do work, and our reputation sort of understands and works on a risk factor. So we actually discriminate a little bit in how we choose people and where we place them, but we also do it in a way that considers their safety, the safety of the clients and young people in mental health situations that we work in and our staff work in. We both employ people in a temporary capacity, and we also work with them in a temporary and a full-time employment capacity, in placing them in agencies such as YSAS and Hope Street and other organisations like that. We target qualifications are usually really important. We see that as a key factor, knowing that the industry needs a professional capability to work with. So working I'm just going to stop that for a minute so it's easier for me. So working in our three pillars, we work with the diploma and bachelor degree and master graduates and so forth. We also make our decisions and value-based decisions on how we recruit people in their decision-making capabilities. So when they're actually going into Y parks or similar situations, they can actually make decisions that won't put themselves at risk professionally or other people at risk. So there's a real, I suppose, a complexity about how we recruit. If I think about the average young person that comes into our organisation looking for work and how we can support them into those sort of pathways and place them in agencies, we often come up against application and interview, a limited understanding in application interviews. People may come in, but they might be quite articulate, but not necessarily have a genuine, tangible connection to what work requirement is, particularly 18 to 22-year-olds and just new graduates. And potentially relying on friends and family about workplace information and how they might, what the realities of work might be. It gives them, what that provides is a limited confidence in how they can sort of stabilise quickly in a role, which is really important for them to progress their career. One of the things that we also note is that they struggle sometimes with understanding the legal complexities of work. They struggle sometimes understanding what their rights are, their obligations are as an employee, what their employer obligations are, the people that they work with and for. We also see a lot of barriers and challenges sometimes in how they approach the psychometric profile. And this is a huge issue in HR and recruitment areas at the moment, where people end up completing psychometric profiling tools and find themselves on database records coming out with certain challenges or work approaches that might not be suitable in some areas, which is a real challenge. Having knowledge of that's a really big issue. Usually casual employment too, and so the COVID-19 situation's created a huge amount of economic vulnerability there as well. And if the place that we work in human services recruitment, and we look at the economic barriers, then we have neglect, we might have poor role models for certain young applicants. We might have other challenges around learning challenges such as dyslexia or anxiety, and then we have cultural and diversity and language challenges. And then obviously we're hitting the COVID recession. So from our perspective, there's a number of challenges that are really confronting young people. I suppose from a professional perspective, we're really interested in our four speakers and what they can offer in that space, and also how McArthur as an organisation can continue to support and promote young people engagement and employment within this sector. So with that, I can sort of hand back to you, Karen, and thanks everyone for your time.
Yay, Sean. Thanks so much.
Ooh,
and I'm
had
sure
a bit of technical issue.
that's all right. We're all very, very patient and kind to each other in the virtual world, Sean, because we've all had those problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you. So I'm going to jump now over to our first speaker, Emma Cull. Emma uses she, her pronouns and is the Senior Manager for Youth at the Brotherhood of St. Laurence. Emma has led the development and delivery of a number of youth programs and initiatives across Brotherhood's BSL's youth team, including playing a key role in the development of the Education First Youth FOIA model and key initiatives in leaving care, education and employment. Emma has worked in the community sector for over a decade and is passionate about working at the nexus of policy, practice and research to inform long-term and systemic solutions to disadvantage. Welcome, Emma. Just pop your microphone on. How you going there? All right, so that bottom left of the, there you
okay,
go.
Sorry, yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself for a moment there. My name is Emma Cull. I'm from the Brotherhood of St. Laurence. I work in the youth team there and I use she, her pronouns. And I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm coming to you from, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Callanan Nation, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Thanks very much for having me here today to talk about this topic, and it's something at the Brotherhood of St. Laurence that we think a lot about. Young people are at a disadvantage in the labour market, even when we're not in recession. This is because of their comparative lack of experience, but as well as many structural factors, like things like transport, lack of housing options, lack of supported entry-level roles across many industries, and declining rates of on-the-job training, as well as a decline in the relevance of training to growth areas of employment. So in 2019, only a quarter of all vocational education and training graduates were employed in the occupation associated with their qualification. So the competitive disadvantages for young people really are exacerbated, as Karen talked about, in times of economic crisis, which really historically have seen a real spike in youth unemployment. Heading into 2020, before COVID, youth unemployment rates had remained at above GFC levels for more than a decade. So it shows the kind of the long time that it takes for this to recover. And I think at the moment we're seeing some public narratives of youth unemployment rates returning to pre-COVID levels, but this really hides kind of some of what's really happening. We know that part-time work accounts for more than half of all employment for 15 to 24-year-olds, and almost 1 in 5 young people are underemployed and wanted to work more hours. And we also know that wage stagnation and lack of career mobility options means that getting a job or any job is just not enough to guarantee young people security. So I think it's really important to have those key things around suitable, safe and meaningful work, and secure as well. So while there are some occupations that are growing in need for workers, and one of those is aged and social care roles, and a range of jobs within agriculture or transport and logistics, these occupations often don't offer apprenticeship or traineeship opportunities and require, 12, 19 or 18 months of campus-based training before people can get a job. This is a big commitment if you've never thought about a career in those industries before, or don't really know much about the opportunities and pathways that this type of work can lead to. It also means that employers who need staff now don't have access to a ready workforce. So part of the work that the Brotherhood of St Laurence is trying to do is line up different parts of the system to strengthen pathways to entry-level work. And one of the ways we're doing this is through testing a skilled entry to work model for young people who are unemployed. This work sits within our role as the enabling organisation of the National Youth Employment Body. And this is basically a coalition of people and organisations who are invested in driving solutions for youth employment. It's working to support local communities to design job creation initiatives and pathways that are relevant to the needs of industries employers in that region and provide skilled, flexible pathways for young people. And it also links the local kind of context to a national policy makers to ensure that they can understand what's happening on the ground and make the right investments. So the pilot's really looking at different modes of curriculum and training delivery that enable young people to start working without making 12 to 18-month training commitment. This includes utilising curriculum options such as stackable skill sets, which essentially identify minimum units of competency needed to be undertaken before someone can start work. So this can be done in as little as 8 weeks and provides just an entry pathway to a career or just to a job for now. So in particular, we're looking at training and career explorations across 3 growth industries. So that's, as I said, aged and social care roles, agriculture, and also transport and logistics sectors. So in addition to tailoring training packages that allow young people to explore these industries without committing to that long sort of term training, the pilot will work with young people, or is working with young people, to explore career opportunities in these sectors and to understand how they could develop career pathways either within and through that sector or into other sectors. So while the pilot hasn't really focused on sort of looking at outcomes and the numbers of people who have completed, it really has looked at sort of those career entryways in and how young people can explore different options through that. So for many young people, the pilot afforded an opportunity to try out something that they had never thought about before. And for some, that's led to ongoing employment opportunities, provided a source of income, or a decision to go back and actually do that study while they're working. So I'm going to pop a little video a link to a video in the chat that talks about some of the people who have undergone this pilot and have had really different but great experiences. And so thanks very much for having me on today.
Oh, Emma, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I've madly been taking notes for the questions later, and I'm sure everyone else will be too. Yeah, big shout out to the Brotherhood. You've got some fantastic programs going on. And obviously amazing people working in them. So we'll move on now. Sorry, itchy nose. Doesn't it always happen when you're on camera? We'll move on now to Mairead Lesman. Mairead uses pronouns she, her, and is the acting director of the Young Workers Centre. Mairead was previously the senior digital organiser at Trades Hall, focused on researching the far right and its rise online, and focused on building the union movement's digital capacity to combat it. That's the good fight, isn't it? She started her career in social justice in advocacy and campaign roles at Oak Tree before starting with Trades Hall Council, where she organised grassroots union activists in key marginal seats. Mairead is passionate about empowering young workers to organise as a collective and enforce their rights at work. So over to you, Mairead. Thank you. Those little microphone buttons are really hiding themselves this morning, aren't they? There you go.
Hello. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm calling in from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This land was stolen, never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. My name's Mairead. Like mentioned, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Acting Director of Young Workers Centre here in Victoria. We've existed for 5 years now based on the idea that young workers across this state were facing huge and unique challenges at work, and they needed somewhere they could find legal help, get support to organise their workplaces and campaign for broader policy change that would help all young workers. When I was thinking about this panel, I began to get a little bit overwhelmed about where to start and what to focus on. It's such a huge and important topic. But what I came back to was insecurity, which in my mind is kind of fundamentally what we're talking about today. Guaranteeing access to suitable, safe and meaningful work for young people is predicated on job security. Almost all of the challenges we deal with through the centre are challenges of insecurity, often exacerbated by a pretty intense power dynamic between a young worker and their 40, 50-year-old boss. Wage theft, cash in hand, bullying, harassment are all symptoms of insecure work. But then on top of that, whether or not you feel like you can get the support to deal with those issues while you're in that job also goes to the insecurity that young people feel when they're at work. I think what's really important to acknowledge, and that I think this panel does, is that these were issues that young people were facing prior to COVID, and it's only been exacerbated by the issues that are currently happening. And 100% out of recessions, young people tend to lose the most, and workplace scarring is a real issue. But I think because of the endemic nature of casual work, of contract work, of insecure work, because it's only grown since the GFC, and because of the nature of this pandemic and, like, let's name it, the policy levers that were pulled by this federal government, young people are facing a huge uphill battle, one of the biggest we've seen in a really long time. Scott Morrison early this year was saying that the economy was bigger now than it was before the pandemic. And worth noting that this was prior to the East Coast being in lockdown. And at the time, he technically was right. There were more jobs in the economy. But when he said it, there might have been 70,000 more jobs for those over the age of 25. But for those under the age of 24, there was 74,000 less. So that's bad, right? And on top of bad, we get the Australian super numbers, who said that 400,000 young people completely depleted their super because of the pandemic. So we go from bad to worse, right? Then we get JobMaker. JobMaker was the federal government's answer to creating work for young people. It was supposed to create 450,000 jobs, and it created 609, which is about 0.1%. So we've gone bad to worse to terrible. And finally, the most horrifying bit of the whole thing is that there are so many young casual workers that weren't even able to access JobKeeper in the first place because they hadn't been with the same employer for long enough, even though that's the nature of the work at that age, which meant horrifyingly, during the peak of the pandemic here in Victoria and what's happening now in New South Wales, young hospo and retail workers having to make a terribly scary choice between not being able to pay rent and put food on the table, or potentially getting others sick. And look, all of that's fairly depressing, hey, but I think it's important to acknowledge the context we're in. The impacts of COVID have made it incredibly clear that insecure work needs to be fixed in our country. And the thing is, we kind of know how. At a Victorian level, there were payments implemented if you needed to get tested and stay home and quarantine, which helped, which currently don't exist in New South Wales. What that says is that workers need sick leave. Our society pretty much crumbled because people didn't have access to it. That is one tiny small point in a much bigger scheme, but the reality is this isn't an individual issue to fix. This is collective. There are laws that need changing. Casualised work was not meant to be endemic in the way that it is now. It was primarily set up as ad hoc, actual casual work. And now there are workers working the same shifts each and every week for years who are casual workers. Casual conversion should exist. if you're working the same shifts each and every week, you should be part-time. Year-to-year contracts should be used rarely and not for ongoing work. And the jobs we create out of this pandemic have to have a focus on environmental sustainability. That is critical, and particularly in recent light of the recent IPPC report, although we've all known it for a while. It does feel very unlikely that we're going to get the laws changed federally at any minute, hey, not with this government. But for now, what we can do is we can organise workplace by workplace, industry by industry. There are stopgaps, state levers that have been pulled. The secure work pilot scheme is going to be really critical to see if we can offer sick leave to casual workers. But ultimately, the way that we fix this is to join your union, get your mates at work too, and organise. Thanks.
Woohoo! Thank you, Mairead. Fantastic. What a rousing rant there. Really appreciate it. Sorry, it is still a bit early in the morning to be speaking, but yeah, fantastic presentation. Thank you. So we're going to jump straight over to Emma Linton. Hello, Emma. Emma's a digital marketing and communications specialist with expertise in the education and non-profit sectors. In 2020, Emma was one of 9 interns engaged by the LLENs, the Local Learning Employment Networks, in the Loddon Campaspe region to conduct research into connecting young people in regional areas with jobs in growing industries. Emma uses she, her pronouns, is currently studying a Bachelor of Arts majoring in sociology, and was recently employed as that Vic Lens communications coordinator. So thanks, Emma, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma and I go by she, her pronouns. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this session is taking place on Aboriginal land, Wurundjeri country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and to any Aboriginal people who are here today. Sovereignty for these lands has never been ceded, and there is no justice without First Nations justice. So I work now for the Victorian Lens, and as Karen just mentioned, I was one of 9 young interns who was trained to survey 26 employers and 250 young people in the Loddon Campaspe region. So think Bendigo, Echuca, the Macedon Ranges. And although there's a lot of bad news lately for young people during this COVID-19 recession, we've heard a lot of bad news. But I'm here actually to tell you today that we've found some really good news, and I'm really excited to share it with you. So some of our findings were, firstly, that there is a diversity of entry-level jobs in our region, and this is across a wide range of industries. And despite COVID-19, many of these industries were actually growing. So think healthcare, food production, agriculture. Demand for confectionery was actually stronger in 2020 lockdown than during the year before, and I can't imagine why. But you know, some industries even pivoted to adapt to COVID-19. So one employer that we spoke to had pivoted to building mask making machines in Shepparton. And the second piece of good news that we found was that employers really wanted to hire young people. We heard quotes such as, "It's not just a responsibility, it's a delight." And young employees are an asset to the workplace. They bring fresh ideas, they're open to learning new things, and they're really competent with technology. We also found that young people's interests in the region aligned with the types of work that was on offer. So one of the highest ranking interests from young people was helping other people, and the healthcare and social assistance sector has been shown to experience the most rapid growth in both the region and across the state. So this actually ultimately means that although many young people often think they need to move away from their hometown in regional areas to find opportunities for work, our research suggests that young people may actually find some advantage over their counterparts, their city counterparts, by working in their own regions. So we also found some great advice for young people through talking to employers about what they were looking for. And the one key thing we found is that employers look for experience on a CV. Employers look for experience on a CV first and foremost. So academic results and skills are not as important as what we think they might be, with most of our employers saying that they would actually be willing to bring on entry-level employees and train them on the job. And experience also might not be what young people think. It might not be as formal as what we imagined. So it could be something like community sports. One of our employers was saying that they really valued community sports on a resume because it showed that young people could work in a team. And we also found some additional great ideas for looking for jobs, acing interviews and using referees, which we encourage you to see in the full report. We came up with some suggestions and recommendations for supporting young people. And one of the key things we really wanted to see was a commitment to a jobs first approach in recovery planning. And this is to create a pipeline of young workers to growing industries and systems to help people find them. So what does this mean? This means that there are jobs and there are young people. We just need to connect the two of them together. We'd also like to see a rural careers education model, which means that young people can meet employers earlier in school. We'd like to see jobs information portals to give real-time data to local labour market data to our regions, and also to show people where opportunities are locally. And we'd like to see every young person leave school with a driver's license, safety training, such as an RSA or a white card, a LinkedIn profile, and basic financial literacy. So at the moment, even more excitingly, this research internship is being conducted again in Northeast Victoria, and they've found the same things that we did. And they also found some additional things. One of their key findings was that work experience, although it's a foundation for young people's careers, the system is collapsing and has collapsed due to COVID-19. Many industries aren't providing work experience opportunities at the moment due to COVID. Many businesses are just simply in survival mode. So we're really emphasizing now that we need to find new ways for young people to gain meaningful work experience. And when we say meaningful, Karen brought this up in the intro, what does meaningful mean? And meaningful means, doing something more than just cleaning and bringing coffees. It means giving young people opportunities to learn transferable skills in the workplace. And these second group of interns also really wanted to see a careers education model which had better funding. They wanted to hear from employers while they were still in school. Students needed the opportunities to speak to these employers and earlier. Students need to be also exposed to modern job opportunities, which represent the future of work, but not just traditional ones. So How Work ultimately has taught us that even though everything isn't perfect, there's some really positive news. And we'd like to provide a bit of balance to that narrative for young people, that it's not all over. One employer said, "I'd love to be a young person again because the future of work looks so exciting." So with the right response to recovery, we can bridge a gap connecting young people to growing industries and build a robust regional economy. Thanks very much.
Wow, that's outstanding work, Emma and the Lens. Have I? Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you. Yes, I'm back. Really helpful. Thank you, Emma. And I know there's going to be a lot of people looking to read that research. And I'm sure it will be made available to us, and we'll let you know at some point during the rest of the program. Our final speaker, probably with more good news, I think. Our final speaker is Kate Roach. Kate has been the Executive Officer of Beyond the Bell Great South Coast since July 2019. The work of Beyond the Bell connects Kate and the collective of organisations across 6 local government areas of Southwest Vic, and has the vision of all young people are connected to education and engaged in their learning. Kate has extensive leadership and secondary teaching experience in a variety of settings throughout Australia. Kate grew up in this region. She's now working in and has strong connections with various groups and organisations, including us. Kate and I have worked together on a fabulous project called Youth Conversations, which I really hope she's going to tell you about. Yay. Thank you, Kate. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thanks for having me, and great to be here. I would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal land that I'm coming in from today, which is Loddon Marae country, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So I want to link straight back to Karen's opening comments around purpose and meaning, and the link to a very recent research piece that Beyond the Bell and a number of collaborators have completed, the Youth Conversations Research Report, and the link will be in the chat. So across the 6 local government areas, we engaged over 700 young people in a conversation around 3 themes around what's working well in their community, what would help them stay in school, keep engaged and connected, and in terms of pathways and careers. And because it was occurring and the pandemic came along, we added a couple of questions as we progressed around the pandemic. So my key points today coming directly from that report of what the 711 voices that we could use for the analysis told us about the links to work. So very early on, they were talking about the importance of engagement in learning. So what they're learning in school, they really want a strong connection back to community and to the possibilities of work. So one of the examples is if they are volunteering already in community, how can they use that volunteer experience to then link back to their school learning, and then the possible pathways and careers that could stem from that, and what does that look like for them? And what are the possibilities in their region? So I like the saying, you can't be what you can't see. So one of the challenges is to ensure that we're opening up the possibilities to young people in our region. So if I think about, we're a very rich agricultural centre in Southwest Victoria. So what are the possibilities in that aspect, and what does that look like for young people if they want that pathway? So having really strong connections with businesses, employers, industry, and strong connections to schooling and the education settings in the region. We have a university here, we have TAFE. So there's lots of different connections that we can support and continue to enable that strong collaboration in that work. They also there was really strong comment around the stigma that's associated with VCAL, so vocational and applied learning. They don't like the stigma that's associated with it. They often don't choose that option at school because of the stigma. So they are wanting to make sure that that is a viable option, that it's good to be opting into that opportunity, and they want to see more opportunity in that area. And I think given the recent state government senior years reform papers that are out for consultation, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space. Also, there was a link to the earlier speakers around career education in schools. They have also very strongly said that they want clearer, more concise career planning earlier. So having it in year 11 and 12, they're saying it's a little bit late then. We're trying to focus on our actual studies then. So give us some information earlier and give us some experiences and opportunities of what the world of work looks like earlier. So that was another strong point. And in terms of, I thought the other interesting point of the report, which was mentioned earlier as well, was around transport. So young people are keen to work, but often if they're in a rural community, there's no public transport available. Their parents, families, carers don't have the opportunity or capability to get them into a major town where the work is available. So that's limiting their options. So I think as a community in a region, we have some thinking around that for our young people. And I know Yakvik have been partnering with a number of people to think about the use of school buses. And I think that's a great example of how perhaps collectively we can think different about how we can give access to young people to work. So where are we at in terms of that work for Beyond the Bell? We're still sitting with the report. We are going to certainly continue to engage and have young people around the table. And I like the quote yesterday around, don't just invite them to the table, give them the table. So that's definitely something to think about. And to think about stronger connections between schools, industry, employers. And I know our local LLENs do great work in that space, the Southwest LLEN and the Glenelg Southern Grampians. And there are other organisations that are making strong links to industries and our TAFEs and unis in the region. So we enable and can assist in that collaboration and background, and that's part of our work and part of our brief. So I encourage you to have a look at the report, consider it for your region, what it might mean for your young people as well. So thank you.
Yay, Kate. I think you've sold everybody on that report. And yes, the link's there in the chat. And yeah, look, I've totally got to underline the importance of that work for our region, and I think there's a lot of relevance to for other regions. You know, these weren't hand-picked young people; they're just young folk in a rural area, rural and regional areas. And yeah, actually, one really lovely aspect of that project too was that we trained up young people to run the focus groups with other young people. So there was some fantastic work from Sam at Yakbik in training the young facilitators, which I reckon had a big impact on the quality of the information that came out, having young people facilitate the sessions. I wonder, would you like to speak to that, Kate? Is that something that you know, the voices of young people, they're not always going to jump back at, you know, when some old lady Karen comes asking questions. Do you think there's, you know, what do you think's the importance there of having young people involved in that, developing the responses?
Oh, I think you've definitely got the young person lens on it then, because we have a different way that we talk or that we write different, like in terms of the question design is a really good example. The adults in the room or the older people in the room had an idea of the questions, but really it needed a young person lens to make sure that they could answer them well. And I think the nice link with training up the youth facilitators is they've been able to grab some work in the region because they've got that training. So that was a really nice model to go with.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I've had some questions come through on the Q&A. And actually, this is something that you could all respond to. And perhaps we'll start with Emma Cull. What advice would you give to young people who are trying to demand, there's a little bit of a, what advice would you give to young people who are trying to demand that they be guaranteed work? So at an advocacy level, but also in their own lives, trying to demand guaranteed work. Yeah, sorry. It's always a little bit, you've got pedantic on the language here. So young people who are out there wanting some guarantees around their work, what advice would you give them in terms of their advocacy for themselves, but also for other young people?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak just quickly to that, but I think, you know, Mairead probably in her presentation had some really good advice around that, which is about joining your union, knowing your rights, making sure that that you're asking kind of the right questions and not know what's within your rights to be able to ask your employers. But I think, you know, it is really hard, particularly in current economic circumstances where people really want to get a work. Employers are asking more of people, and they think that they have to agree to conditions just to be able to get any sort of job. So I think it's really important to know your rights and to be linked into people who can support you and back you up in those rights.
Thanks, Emma. Mairead, you probably want to back that up.
Yeah, pretty much. I think the really important part is you don't have to do it alone. And I think this is where organising and the collective come into like a really important force of like doing it with your workmates, making sure that you've got support from your union, coming to places like, you know, Young Workers Centre. We can support you in doing this organising work. It's really hard, it's really difficult, but it can be done if you do it together. It does equal out that power dynamic with the boss. And so I think that I would, just like to second what Emma said there.
Nice one. Thank you. And I'd also refer people to Dr. Harry Shear's presentation from yesterday morning. You may not have been logged on by then, but he used this phrase protagonismo when talking about young people organising, becoming activists together on issues that they're passionate about. Harry's work will be linked, I reckon, in the expo area. Thank you, Thomas, for nodding there. Much appreciated. And it's revolutionary. It's so exciting, his work on youth participation in general, but particularly, you know, expanding on the young people and protagonismo. I just love saying it. I should, yeah. Hope I didn't mess up the accent too badly. Sorry. Sorry, we'll continue on with this question a little bit because it is really crucial, I think. Emma, is there something that you'd really advise young people in regards to having their rights met at work and guaranteeing some kind of decent work?
Yes, definitely. I think that there's two parts to this question, and one is around creating the right structures for young people to be able to find work. But the other thing is some practical day-to-day things that young people can do to give themselves the best possible chance at finding this work. So in terms of the first part of that question, we'd really like to see a better connection between industry and employers and schools. And as I said earlier, getting employers into school earlier so young people can actually start building connections with employers at the earliest point possible, because our research and many other research has shown that this is something that means that young people are significantly more likely to be able to get their foot in the door right from the get-go. In terms of on that second part of the question, things that young people can do despite the structure that we're in, there's 5 really practical tips that we had for young people to really help them get their foot in the door and get a job even at an entry level without some of this further study, because I appreciate our first speaker did talk a lot about how sometimes there can be a huge prerequisite to getting work. And so these 5 tips were, firstly, that experience is the main thing that employers look for on a CV. So get some experience, but this might not be what you think. This might be volunteering. Anything our employers were saying that shows that you can commit to something, that you can work in a team, that really demonstrates some of these transferable skills. So experience doesn't have to just be a paid job. Secondly, who you are, your attitude and how you fit in with the team is really what employers are looking for in an interview. So don't be afraid to be yourself, show who you are and really, show how you'll fit in with their workplace culture. Thirdly, young people have advantages over old people. So actually use that to sell yourself as well. You know, you're not always going to be coming into this with a disadvantage. Think about the things that you have as a young person. Inherently, you're a digital native. You're somebody who can navigate the workplace with fresh ideas and energy and use that as an asset to sell yourself in the workplace. Really flip that narrative. And the fourth tip was that referral is a really important part of work. So get good referees. People tend to know if you put someone down who's, a bit bodgy and so get someone who can vouch for you well. And finally, look for jobs in numbers of ways. We have at the Lens lots of different local jobs portals, but look across different mediums through word of mouth, because we're finding that our employers are advertising in several different ways.
Thank you, Emma. And you've picked up very much on the connections between that sort of personal interests and community and volunteering and what you're into that Kate and others have referenced as well. That's a really important part of bringing together, like the connections across this area that we're lacking, aren't we? So the pathways to meaningful work, the connections between, the Brotherhood and the industries that, are going to make jobs more accessible, I think, understandable in terms of how young people get into those jobs. Yeah. Is there something there, Kate, that you'd like to comment on? So those connections, I think, have been really important to make for young people, or will be in future. Is that where you see some of the beyond the youth conversations work going?
Yeah, and I think to add to the great points made is around young people are keen for work placement and work experience, but I know some educational settings are finding that tricky to fit in. So I would really encourage that. Find the time and the space and the place to make that happen, and really gear them ready. And so maybe let's go back to the Careers Ed resources, and let's make sure that rights and responsibilities are covered really well for young people. And I think the other point around that is that you know, young people should be encouraged to reach out to a mentor or a significant other. Like if they're worried about what's happening in the workplace, that they can always take them with them for that discussion. You don't have to have that discussion on your own. So maybe as a community, we need to make sure that that's quite open and transparent. These are the people that could link and support you if you're worried or if there's concerns. So that once you leave the school setting, for example, that's not lost. There are other people out there that can help you. So maybe that's a building and awareness for young people in our own local communities, that these people that can assist.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm going to alert everybody to the question that we're going to consider now, which is following on exactly, and I think you've started the process really nicely. Question for the breakout groups we're going to move into now is going to be in the chat box, and it's what needs to be done now and in the future to guarantee that young people have access to suitable, safe and meaningful work. Well, I have no doubt whatsoever that you've all just had the most amazing conversations, and I can't wait to see the results of the Menti, where I hope you've put lots of comments. Please, please, please type what you said into the Menti so that we can share them. And have those amazing ideas documented to share, and to, hey, there might be the answer in here, because we have got the answers, haven't we? I think you've all the speakers this morning have clearly identified that this is not rocket science. This is about making connections with young people and for young people, and enabling young people to make those connections from their life, their interests, their everything that they're passionate about, make the connections into education and work from that perspective. And that's how we can make engagement in education and work and the world much more meaningful, and have a much better chance of having that a sustainable, oh God, sorry, I hate that word, have that something that is maintained, not perhaps guaranteed, but maintained. Now, I did have something else I had to say now. I'm just gonna, sorry, got a little bit carried away there. I wanted to say that we're incredibly grateful to all of you speakers and Sean, the sponsor. So Emma, Mairead and Kate, thank you so much for your time this morning. And to Sean, the sponsors for the session. I hope you're all still looking at those Menti responses. We are heading now into a 1 hour break, so you can take a rest. Please don't go checking your emails, have a screen break, or even better than that is head to a very special Zoom session, which I tried really hard, worked really hard to make sure that this happened. Language warning, it's called How I Fucked Up. And it's going to be a fabulous interactive opportunity with experienced youth workers sharing stories of their mistakes and what they learned. I think, we've all made some hilarious and sometimes terrible mistakes, and this is a chance to learn from some of them and have a laugh and feel the feels and promote some empathy and take the pressure hat off. So I do encourage you to pop into that session. It's not something that you'd necessarily have to be in for the whole hour, but do pop in and say hey and tell your story, or, just have a giggle at other people's stories. The speaker sessions will start again at 12:15. You can choose from one of the three parallels. Where have all the rural youth workers gone? Young people and youth justice, and sexual health and healthy relationships for rural young people. So some fantastic stuff coming up throughout the day. And I want to totally thank you all for being part of this session and providing such great feedback into our process of trying to guarantee decent work for young people. Really appreciate it. So thanks everybody and bye.